weeks we'd focus on actually what Jesus did for us. My sermon today is called Love That Forsakes. And it reminds me of the fact that very often, even in a crowd, even in a family, even in a church, even in community, people are lonely. In fact, you would think in this world of interconnectivity, in this world where you're as likely to have a friendship with somebody in Australia as you are with somebody in North Carolina, you would think that would build more interconnectivity. But what social researchers are finding out, and what people are finding out in general, is people feel lonely. People feel disattached. People feel like there's so many options for friends that we never really settle down and build relationships. Now, John Bowman was a research psychologist, and he studied particularly children who, for whatever reason, never built the relationship or the bond that they craved. What he studied is the impact that had on them as they moved into adulthood. In fact, what he found through his research is that if a strong bond is not built with a child by the age of 6, that child will probably struggle with intimate friendships that are meaningful their whole life. They will be shallow. They will be confrontational. In fact, there's a word for it. It's called attachment disorder. Now, Tigam is a typical young girl who grew up in an orphanage. Tigam never knew why she grew up in an orphanage. Tigam never found out who her parents were. Tigam never knew if she was abandoned or if it was circumstantial. But it didn't matter because her whole life, Tigam lived with an emptiness. Her whole life, Tigam lived with something not feeling complete. Her whole life, she struggled with her interpersonal relationships because when do we learn to bond with people? We learn when we're babies to bond with people. And what we find is that children who grow up in orphanages, and it doesn't matter what part of the world, all struggle to make bonds for life. Because they had no parental figure. In Tigam's example, people only picked her up to feed her. In Tigam's example, people only picked her up to change her. And so what happened is she grew up, and yes, eventually a family took her, and yes, eventually she did somewhat bond with that family, and yes, she eventually did go to high school, she did go to college, she did live a normal life, but in every relationship, in every exchange, in every friendship, there was this space of loneliness, this feeling of having been forsaken. And it went past for Tigam, it went past this idea of actually something that had happened to her into this thing that just bothered every one of her relationships without her ever knowing why. It was like a ghost that haunted her. Now, you don't have to come from a perfect family. You don't have to come from the best family. You may, no, I'll just take it back. I was going to say you may come from a dysfunctional family, but that would be a lie. And here's the truth. You're not going to like it, but it's the truth. You do come from a dysfunctional family because there are no such thing as functional families. I know. We geared a society to believe that we're all going to build these perfect families, but there are none. Because people are broken. So we all, even though we did bond, and we're not exactly like Tigam, we all just have this sense of forsakenness. We all struggle with, where do I end and where do you begin? We all have different ideas of how much we want to connect or how much we will let people connect. But here's the thing. If your children have abandoned you in your old age, if you abandon your children in their young age, if your spouse got up and walked out on you, if your employer stopped believing in you and gave you the pink slip, no one ever lives a life without feeling forsaken. And when I say everyone, I even include Jesus. Think about his life. I mean, all he wanted his disciples to do is just go over by that rock and just pray for my life because I'm about to die. You've heard me say the Son of Man must go up to Jerusalem and be crucified, and in the third day he will rise again, and I just don't want to do this, so I'm going to go over there and pray. You stay over here and pray. But they didn't. See, because sometimes people give up on you just because they're tired and it doesn't have anything to do with you. But Jesus was forsaken. And it wasn't enough to be forsaken in the garden. What about in the courtyard when the woman says to Peter, you sound like a Galilean. Peter, you had that potty mouth thing going on. You sound like a Galilean. You must be with him. Jesus was forsaken again. And even when we get to the cross, only Mary and John are there. Like, where? I don't know. Maybe Joseph is dead. Well, we could maybe say that, but where are Jesus' brothers? I've not always been close to my family. I live in a whole different country, but if one of them's dying, I'm going. Where are Jesus' brothers? Jesus' brothers are so absent that Jesus has to look at someone who is not his biological brother and say, be a son to mom. Because when they forsake me, they forsook her. Jesus is a man who's acquainted with sorrows. Jesus is a man who's acquainted with great grief. Jesus is a man who knows what it's like to love people who do not love him back. Have you ever loved someone and no matter what you did, you could not get them to love you back? It's immensely frustrating. It's immensely hurtful. And it's not unlike the image on the screen. You're dying a little bit every day. This is why Jesus says, as they're putting the nails into his hands, this is why Jesus says, Father, you have to forgive them. This isn't a permanent breach in our relationship. They may kill me, Father, but I'm not giving up on them. Forsaken, he still says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And what can we even say about once he gets on the cross? It doesn't get any better. Oh, we could say, well, one guy is like, come on, Jesus, remember me when you go into your kingdom, and that's all great. But the other guy, while Jesus is literally dying for him, is cussing Jesus out. Now, It's not even that the guy doesn't know that Jesus is dying for him because the other thief on the other side told him and then died. There he is, just dying there for connection, just dying there to feel something. Just dying there. Literally, listen, he's literally dying there on that cross because he can't feel love anymore. He can't feel anyone who cares. He can't feel connected to anyone. He is like Tigam. He is like the bond that should have been forged has been severed. It is like no one has ever loved me. And theologically, we know what is happening. Theologically, we know the sins of the world are being laid upon Jesus. And theologically, we know as the sins of the world are being laid upon Jesus, sin deprecates and destroys relationships. And the transfer of sin is falling upon Jesus up on that cross. That's the point of the cross, right? You know, when you sin against someone or when someone sins against you, doesn't it hurt? Doesn't it damage your relationship? Doesn't it make you angry or hurt or offended or forsaken or draw back into yourself? But that's what's happening to Jesus. But think about every time it's happened to you, all of those sins are going on him at once. And not just for you, but everyone. Whoever hurt another person. The guilt of that pain, the guilt of that broken relationship, the weight of that shame, the weight of that brokenness is being consecrated onto one person. Now, if you stop and you think about this for a minute, because we often think about these things at this time of year, and we think about them very passively and very pretty, and we sing nice songs about the glory of the cross. There's not that much glorious about having all the guilt of the world placed on you. The glory is not on him. The glory is going to us, because that's what substitutionary atonement means. He's taking our punishment, and we're taking his glory. The glory of the cross is for us, but it's the shame of the cross for him. And he's bearing that pain, that worst pain, that high school crush that you were just in love with and you didn't think you could live without, that didn't even invite you to the dance. He's feeling that pain amped up 6 billion times, but that's just for today, not for last generation or the generation before that or the generation before that. He's bearing the weight of every bad transaction. He's bearing the weight of every hurt feeling. He's bearing the weight of every shattered relationship. He's bearing the weight of every broken marriage. He's bearing the weight of every job termination. He's bearing the weight of every untimely death. He's bearing the weight of every time someone has hurt someone else, and it crushes him in the heart. Now, I worry about children like Tegan, who never got to build that bond. No one ever held her and rocked her in their arms. When she cried at night, no one ever came. In order to get someone to come, she'd have to cry so loud that it was disruptive to the other children, and then that's the only reason they came. I can't fathom what that feeling would be like concentrated over everyone who has ever experienced it. Look, here's the thing. Sometimes I struggle with my own sins. Sometimes I try to account for my own sins. Sometimes I think about the things that I know I've done that I wish I hadn't, that I wish I could go back and I could change. Sometimes I think about how foolish I was and I realize that was just yesterday. Like if you ever really try to struggle with the things that it is that you have done wrong to other people, if you have ever tried to struggle with the ways that you have hurt real people, like really hurt them, if you actually do an accounting process on that, you will feel your connection to this world and your worthiness for this world and your worthiness for love forsake you. And I can only say that to you because this one thing I know. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We can dress up nice on Sabbath and we can shine up our cars and we can open up a nice package of tofu and we can, double tithe and we can, do all these things. But at the end of the day, you and I, and everyone in this room, are the same. And even the one that, is most advanced, even the one that is most spiritual, even the one that has overcome the most, even the one who is like the saint of the church, even that one has sinned and come short of the glory of God. In all of that, in one moment, actually 3 hours, are poured out onto Jesus. So Jesus says this. Well, first, the 6th hour. From the 6th hour, there was what? Darkness over the land until the 9th. Darkness at midday because sin is being transferred to Jesus. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out, saying, Eli, Eli, lechem sabachthani, which is Aramaic because Jesus actually spoke Aramaic. Thankfully, our Bibles tell us what it means because I don't read Aramaic. Do you? My God, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Now, please, from a theological point of view, understand God has got no place. And please, from a theological understanding, understand when you sin and you feel disattachment disorder, as John Bowman would call it. Failure to bond with your Father of a whole other different kind. Understand, God has gone no place. It is not God that has gone anywhere. It's you and it's me. And in this case, it's Jesus. Jesus has went someplace. Jesus has made a choice. And that choice was to enter into your world and take your sin. And the breach of relationship, the attachment disorder that Jesus is feeling is coming because we never properly in our infancy bonded with our God. Because no one ever does. And not because God's not there. Because we buy into the lie that the distance and the disattachment we feel from God means we're not worthy to be with him, just like Tegan bought into the lie. She never knew why she was in the orphanage. She never will know why she was in the orphanage. But the reason she can't formulate relationships is deep down inside, she still believes there's a reason someone dumped her in that orphanage. And when bad things happen to us, we got a problem. We believe there's a reason God has forsaken us to our sin. We believe there's a reason that God has forsaken us to this punishment. We believe that there's a reason why God is letting us live in this shame. We believe there's a reason why we must swim through this hurt. And you know what? There is a reason, and the only reason is because you're not letting him bear it for you. Because he bore it for you, and that's why he can't stand the feeling of separation and the attachment disorder. My God, why can't I feel the bond of my Father's love anymore? The truth of the matter is, Jesus chose to know what it was like to be Tegan. The truth of the matter is, Jesus has always had an eternal bond with his Father. The truth of the matter is, both in eternity, before his birth on earth and after his birth on earth, Jesus is the first one and the only one that fully bonded with his God in heaven. But because he chose to take our sin, that bond is stretched, and God has got no place, but he just can't feel it. Just like Tegan really has no idea where her parents are. But chooses to believe the worst. Jesus says to the Tegans of the world, Jesus says to the hurt of the world, Jesus says to the forsaken of the world, Jesus says to the pain-bearing of the world, you are not alone. I know exactly where you are more than you do because I was there for you. And you know what? You can't get through it. The good news is you don't have to because I'm carrying it. I'm right there with you. Jesus chose to take that separation. Jesus identifies with the forsaken of the world. In fact, Jesus is not using his own words. He's quoting King David, who felt forsaken in Psalms 22 when his enemies surrounded him. And he was like, where is God? Why is God letting my enemies attack me? Why are these bad things happening to me? You ever have days like that? You see, Jesus is identifying because he knows that that's what you go through. And he knows it's not original. He actually quotes those words from a different king. King David. So King David said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? Why are you so far from the words of my groaning? My God, why are you so far that I can't find rest? Jesus is our rest when you can't find rest. Jesus is our bond. The cross is the way across the gap. Don't think there's something wrong with you. No, there is. But also know what's wrong with you is wrong with everybody else in this room. And also know that what's wrong with everybody in this room is also wrong with everybody outside of this room. We are disassociated and disattached and suffering attachment disorder, even though we're floating around on a rock with 6 billion people. And we now have the ability to instantly communicate to at least 4 billion of them. The problem is we need to bond with our daddy. The problem is, because of the sinful nature that we live with, we must keep re-bonding with our daddy. The truth of the matter is, you don't have to feel disattached. You don't have to feel disassociated. You don't have to feel broken off from love. Because Jesus forsook the one who is love in order to be able to love those who have never really known love. Did you hear me? Jesus forsook the one who is love so that he would know how to love those who really have never known true love. When someone hurts us, we have to remember that they're hurting too. And when we hurt people, we have to remember we're hurting too, but we're making it worse for other people. We also have to remember is we don't have to make it worse. We can make it better. Because Tegan was in a family. Someone eventually took her home. She was a cute little girl. No one's going to let a cute little girl grow up in an orphanage. It's usually those who have damage done to them that it can be visibly seen as opposed to invisibly seen. Like most of our damage, right? Jesus was not done with Tegan. And Jesus is not done with you. When Tegan was in her early adulthood, and after giving birth to her own child, she would look at her own child, holding her own child in her arms, and think, what was so bad about me that my mother and my father couldn't do this for me? She was going to a support group, and someone at the support group invited her to a Bible study. And one day, while they were having the ladies' Bible group, and across the hallway they were having the children's program, she heard the song, Jesus Loves the Little Children. She came to know she was never orphaned. She came to know she always had a father. She came to know that she had a father when she didn't know she had a father. Tegan came to understand that she was able to be in that place because her real father, because of what Jesus did on that cross, because Jesus was willing to take the emptiness that is called Tegan. Jesus was willing to take the disattachment and the disassociation that is called Tegan. And Jesus was willing to suffer in her place. And that's why she was there that day, at that moment. And suddenly, this disassociated relationship that she had had with her adoptive parents clicked. She realized that they had loved her too this whole way through it, but it was her damage that stopped her from loving them back. But now, knowing that God never forsook her, she could forge relationships where she stopped forsaking people. Now, I don't know which phase you're in, but again, I just gonna be as honest as I can with you. All have sinned. All has come short of the glory of God. So it means this: either you're in a phase of life where you're forsaking people, or you're in a phase of life where you're feeling forsaken. But Tegan came to understand both of those phases are our own illusion because of our own broken bond with heaven. And that God is stacking our life with people to love us, to repair that bond, and to bring us into a closer relationship with Him if we would have it. It is done. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, but it is done. You don't need to keep living disassociated from people. You don't need to keep compartmentalizing your life. You don't need to afraid to be hurt because you're just going to be hurt because that's just what happens in a broken world. But you got a daddy. And your daddy is Tegan's daddy. And your daddy's looking out for you, even when you don't know it. Now, I got to throw this in. Tegan's story is not unusual. I can tell you right now, there are 8,000 Tegums right now in the state of Virginia. Just one state. I just keep saying this. I'm just going to keep saying it. It's not for everyone to rescue a Tegum. Maybe not in that way. Maybe you'll be the one that invites her to a Bible study. But you could be the father through Jesus that she needs. This world is full of people who need you to help them find that old rugged cross where the world was associated back together again. Marvin, will you lead us?
On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, wherein was suffering and shame. May our Lord that old cross, wherein He rested there,
There's nothing wrong with any of you that isn't wrong with all of you. If I was a physician, if I was a doctor, I would diagnose you all terminal with the same disease and tell you there's only one medication. I would tell you this medication not only cures you, but it removes your symptoms to the point that you no longer act like you're sick. Because the truth is this: sick or well, Jesus needs you to take the old rugged cross, apply it to not only your life, but the lives of those who have hurt you, the lives of those who mistreat you, and to realize we are all the same. But only some of us will take the medicine to cure us. And those of us who become well must be nurses and doctors to the Tigams that are out there struggling. If you've not been baptized, it's probably time. I know Jesus is calling. You know, this Easter season, this season of thinking about the resurrection, Jesus is calling you to make the decisions you need to make. If you got pain you got to let go of this week, next week, this is the time to do it. Jesus is calling. Jesus is saying, as we're going to find out next week, you may be sick, but you don't have to stay laying down. There is something called the resurrection. But as C.S. Lewis says, everything that will ever be resurrected must first die. So be thankful you're terminal. If you're smart, you'll die now. Stop putting it off so you don't have to die later. Die to your desires, die to your way, die to your addiction, to your disattachment from each other. Mend your relationships and live resurrected, because that's the power we'll talk about next week of the old rugged cross. One more. And this time you guys got to really sing it.
To the old rugged cross, I will ever return. With shame and grief will gladly bear. And above it someday, to my home far away, with glory forever.
Dear Heavenly Father, we need that cross. We need that cross. We need that cross now. We need that cross because next week we need to all be here, because next week we need to hear about life after the cross. Next week we need to find out what comes after the cross. Next week we must find out what happens when our relationships are mended. We must understand, Father, where it is life comes from. But now we need the cross. We must be willing to lay down our pain, our rejection, our disattachments, so that we may find Jesus resurrected in our own lives. Father, I pray for every soul in this room. I pray for every child in this room. I pray for every child we dedicated today, every family we dedicated today. I pray for all those who are remembering when they were dedicated. I pray for all those who remember when they were baptized. But Father, I know this for certain, that your kingdom is not over. You have not finished your work, that you have people you are calling now to make eternal decisions for Jesus. Now is the week of the cross. In Jesus' name.